in the epistle to the Colossians, we read, "For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God." For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. That is the title of our sermon, Hidden in Christ. With Christ in God. What I would like to do this afternoon is to look at this truth of being hidden with Christ in God through the life of the Apostle Paul. Hidden with Christ in God. How did this truth find expression in the life of St. Paul? St. Paul is one of the apostles to whom the resurrection meant so much personally as the guarantee of the new life in Christ. If Christ has not risen, your faith is useless, your hope is hopeless, and you are being Christians for nothing. That's what he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. In the passage to the Colossians church that we have read, he tells us, you have been raised with Christ since they were dead in sin. And now their life is hidden with Christ in God. What this means for Paul is eternal insurance and eternal security. Eternal insurance and eternal security. Jesus spoke about put your treasure in heaven, where no thief breaks in, where it cannot rust. All right? And that was in the Taipei Times this week of some almost over 1 million Indian rupees, paper notes, being eaten by ants in a bank vault. They were kept in a bank, and somehow the ants found their way and chewed at those notes. Jesus says, if you put your treasure in heaven, there no thief breaks in. There no ants can eat. So, this is exactly what the Apostle Paul is also saying. Our lives are hidden with Christ in God. And so, I would like to call this as the Christian eternal insurance and eternal security. St. Paul testifies to this in a number of passages, and I would like to us to look at some of them and see what we can learn for our own faith journeys. Our own faith journeys. Because very often the question is, as we live our lives and we see so many problems in the world, face so many questions, and lead so many philosophies, we begin sometimes to doubt, is this real? Is my Christian faith real? Can it take me through? Is there a heaven? Or is it just this life in this world? Paul was a Jew belonging to the party of the Pharisees. The term Pharisee means separated ones. Those who had separated themselves in their religious observance as the special people of God. People devoted to observing the Mosaic law. They wanted to be holy unto God by strictly observing the law. In their zeal, they made it a public show and looked down upon others who could not live as the Pharisees lived. They became a standard of religiousness. However, Jesus had one word for them: hypocrites. Paul was born in this group, but he was born in a Gentile territory of Tarsus. His family had also achieved Roman citizenship. Paul was proud of his Jewishness and integrity in keeping the law of Moses. And we'll hear a bit more of this. He studied in Jerusalem under Professor Gamaliel, the leading, learned, wise theologian. It was while he was in Jerusalem that he witnessed the stoning of Stephen, one of the deacons and Christian apologists. From that point on, he zealously persecuted the church, not only in Jerusalem, but was now taking the fight even to Damascus in Syria. Now, it was while he was on his journey to Damascus that he encountered the risen Christ. He testifies to this event in Acts of the Apostles when he was speaking before King Agrippa at Caesarea. He says, "I heard a voice say to me in Hebrew, 'Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? You are hurting yourself by hitting back like an ox kicking against its owner's stick.' When Saul asked who was speaking, he was told, 'I am Jesus whom you are persecuting.'" He was persecuting the church because he had come to believe that the resurrection was a hoax, that the disciples were not telling the truth, but telling a lie, that Jesus had risen from the dead. And he wanted to stop this lie from spreading. And so you can imagine his shock when he met Jesus and Jesus says, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting." And then Jesus went on to say, "I have appeared to you to appoint you my servant. You are to tell others what you have seen of me today and what I will show you in future. You are to open their eyes, the Gentiles, and turn them from the darkness of light, from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan to God, so that through their faith in me, they will have their sins forgiven and receive their place among God's chosen people." This is Paul saying to King Agrippa, telling him the story of this encounter. The issue is, whenever anybody meets Jesus, Jesus shows us and tells us that by living our life in our own way, we are only hurting ourselves. Paul, you are hurting yourself. You're not going to win this battle. And so very often when we do things in our own strength, then we hurt ourselves. The second thing is this: when we encounter Jesus, he appoints us to a task. He appoints us to a task. He made Peter and Andrew fishing, and he helped them fish. And in the end, he says, come with me. You'll be fishing human beings. Whenever we encounter Jesus Christ, he gives us a job to do. And thirdly, he says, I'm sending you to the Gentiles and to the Jews to open their eyes. In other words, that work involves some surgical procedure. The doctors are here. Open their eyes. When there is a shot, you have to do an operation in order for the eyes to see. So you have to go and open their eyes, some surgical procedure. From them being blind to becoming sighted. So this is what Jesus sends us to do. And then he says, so that they may turn from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to the power of God. We are on a rescue mission. We are on a rescue mission. People are blind to the things of God. People are living in darkness. And people are living under the destructive forces of Satan. And as God's people, we are in mission to rescue them from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to the power of God. From his experience, the Apostle Paul knew what it meant to meet Christ, knew what it meant to encounter him and to encounter Jesus Christ in the power of his resurrection. In the power of his resurrection. Now, whenever you read the Gospels, read them as documents that were written after the resurrection. Alright? Don't read them as documents telling you the story leading to the resurrection, but rather as documents that were a testimony to the resurrection. Without the resurrection, those stories that you read in the Gospels will be like stories of wonder workers. But once you see the resurrection power, because then you see God at work. Then you see the finger of God at work. Because the God who brought Jesus from the dead is the God who was at work in his ministry, in his healing, in his teaching. God was there. So, when you read the Gospels, read them always as documents after the resurrection. And then, in Galatians, the Apostle Paul, he speaks about his own life. He says, it was no longer that the law of Moses, it's no longer the law of Moses that gave Paul his identity and purpose. Before he met Jesus, the law of Moses gave him his identity, gave him his purpose. But after he met Jesus, that did not matter anymore. But rather, it was the reality of Jesus Christ. This is what he declares in his letter to the Galatians. I have been put to death with Christ on his cross, so that it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. This life that I live now, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave his life for me. Before that, his life He lived his life by the law. He lived his life by the traditions of the Pharisees. He lived his life by the culture of the Jewish religion. But he says no more. I have met the risen Christ, and therefore I live because of Christ. Because with him I was crucified, and with him my life has been changed and made new. And therefore he continues to say, I refuse to reject the grace of God. But if a person is put right with God through the law, it means that Christ died for nothing. Christ died for nothing. We have a lot of religions that are based on works, good works, and trying to please God by good works, trying to earn the favor of God through good works. And so very often we tend to compare ourselves with one another. Well, but I'm better off than the other one. I'm doing better off than the other one. Like the Pharisees were doing. Jesus tells us a story of two people going into the temple, a Pharisee and a sinner. The Pharisee stands there and says, hey, I'm a very good man. I give, I do this, I help the poor. I'm not like this sinner here. And the poor sinner just went and God said, have mercy on me, a sinful person. And Jesus said, is that one who went out justified before God? And this Pharisee was condemned. We can never win God's favor. We can never work our way unto God. We can never bargain our goodness and God's justice. No, we can never do that. It's an impossible task, and any religion that encourages that is bound to fail. The people are bound to be frustrated. And that's why Paul found the grace of God, that in spite of his evil ways and persecution that he carried out, God comes and loves him and embraces him and says, Paul, I've got work for you to do. And so, the death that Christ died, he says, was due to me. Secondly, the cross brought about salvation. Because of that cross, I am reconciled to God. And then thirdly, the new life in Christ, the new